All doctors gave up. Billionaire declared dead until a poor maid's toddler did the impossible overnight. Hello everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our new videos. It's quick, it's free, and it's the best way to help us bring you more dramatic, unforgettable stories. Your support truly means the world. I'd love to know where are you watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. And now let's jump back into the story. The machines were supposed to keep him alive, but everyone in the ICU knew they were really just prolonging the inevitable. Daniel Crawford had been the youngest self-made billionaire in Seattle's tech scene. The man whose software revolutionized how hospitals managed patient data across America. At 32, he'd built an empire from his college dorm room, appeared on magazine covers, and donated millions to medical research. Now he lay motionless in bed 17 of Mercy General Hospital, his own software tracking his declining vitals on monitors that blinked with cold efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 3 months had passed since the accident, and the doctors had stopped using words like recovery or improvement. They used words like minimal and unlikely and prepare yourself. His mother visited twice a day, her designer handbag clutched like a lifeline, her face aging a year with every week that passed. His business partners came less frequently now, their conversations shifting from concern to logistics, from hope to succession planning. The nurses changed his position every 2 hours, checked his feeding tube, monitored his catheter, and recorded notes that all said the same thing. No change, no response, no consciousness. Dr. Patricia Morrison had been Daniel's primary neurologist since the night they'd rushed him in. His skull fractured, his brain swelling, his future shattering in the emergency room. She'd performed the surgery that saved his life, but couldn't save his mind. The hemorrhage had been extensive. The damage was profound. For 3 months, she'd run every test, tried every protocol, consulted with specialists from Boston to Los Angeles. Nothing worked. The brain activity was minimal. The responses absent. He breathed on his own, which was something, but he didn't wake. He didn't dream. He didn't exist anywhere except in the space between life and death. We've done everything we can, Dr. Morrison told his mother on a gray Thursday afternoon, her voice heavy with the weight of surrender. His brain function isn't improving. The scans show no change. I think it's time we discuss long-term care facilities, places that specialize in patients with persistent vegetative states. The words hung in the sterilized air like a death sentence. His mother's face crumpled, her carefully maintained composure finally breaking. He's not gone, she whispered. But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. The hospital had become Daniel's entire world, though he didn't know it. Room 17 became his prison, his sanctuary, his tomb. The afternoon light filtered through blinds that were adjusted by strangers. The television played news he couldn't hear. Flowers arrived and wilted and were replaced. Their fragrances wasted on senses that no longer registered beauty or decay. His billion-dollar fortune couldn't buy him consciousness. His innovations couldn't innovate him back to awareness. Money meant nothing when your mind was gone. The medical staff moved around him with practiced efficiency, professional but detached. He was a body now, not a person. A collection of systems that needed maintenance, not a man who'd once changed the world. They checked his vitals, rotated his limbs to prevent atrophy, and spoke about him in third person, even when standing beside his bed. Only one person spoke to him like he was still human. Her name was Rosa Mitchell, and she was nobody important, just a hospital housekeeper who cleaned room 17 every evening at 6 o'clock. She was 31, bone-tired, and drowning in bills that multiplied faster than her minimum wage paychecks could cover. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Emma, who was sick more often than she was healthy, whose medical expenses Rosa couldn't afford, even though she worked in a hospital. The irony of that wasn't lost on her either. Rosa talked to Daniel every night while she mopped his floor and wiped down his equipment. She told him about her day, about Emma's cough that wouldn't go away, about the price of groceries and the leak in her apartment ceiling that her landlord refused to fix. She knew he couldn't hear her, but talking to him made the work less lonely. Made him seem less like a corpse and more like the person he'd been in the photographs his mother kept on the windowsill. "Rough day, Mr. Crawford," she said softly one evening, emptying his waste bin. "Emma's fever came back. Had to leave her with my neighbor again. And Mrs. Chun charges me $20 now. $20 I don't have, but what am I supposed to do? Can't bring a sick baby to work, right?" She glanced at his face, half expecting some response she knew would never come. His features were handsome, even in unconsciousness, his jaw strong, his dark hair beginning to grow longer than it had been in those magazine photos. He looked peaceful, which seemed cruel. There was nothing peaceful about dying slowly while everyone waited for the inevitable. But Rosa didn't know that tomorrow everything would change and that her desperate choice would do what 3 months of cutting-edge medicine couldn't accomplish. Rosa's phone buzzed with a text message that made her stomach drop. "Can't watch Emma tomorrow. Family emergency. Sorry." Friday morning arrived like a punch to the gut and Rosa stared at her phone screen with growing panic. Mrs. Chen, her usual backup babysitter, had sent the message at 2 o'clock in the morning. Rosa had been too exhausted to see it until her alarm screamed at 5:30, giving her exactly 90 minutes to figure out child care before her shift started. She called her sister in Tacoma. No answer. She called the community daycare. Full wait list. She called every favor she had left and came up empty. Emma was still feverish, still coughing, definitely too sick for the drop-in child care that Rosa couldn't afford anyway. The choice was impossible. Miss work and lose the paycheck she desperately needed, or bring Emma to the hospital and risk getting fired for violating policy. Rosa had been written up twice already this year for being late, for leaving early when Emma's school called about her asthma attack. One more strike and she'd be gone, replaced by someone without complications, without a sick kid, without the constant chaos that poverty created. She looked at Emma sleeping fitfully on the couch, her small chest rising and falling with congested breaths, her cheeks flushed with fever. 3 years old and already the child had learned to apologize for being sick, for costing money, for making everything harder. It broke Rosa's heart every single day. "I'm sorry, baby," Rosa whispered, making a decision that felt like failure. "You're coming to work with Mommy today." She dressed Emma in warm clothes, packed crackers and juice boxes, and prayed that her supervisor wouldn't make rounds on the 3rd floor. The bus ride took 40 minutes. Emma's head heavy on Rosa's shoulder, her small hand clutching her mother's worn jacket. Other passengers stared with judgment or sympathy. Rosa couldn't tell which and was too tired to care. This was survival, not pride. Dignity was a luxury she'd surrendered years ago when Emma's father left and the medical bills started arriving. Mercy General Hospital buzzed with its usual Friday chaos when Rosa clocked in at 7:15. Emma hidden in an oversized hoodie, her face buried against Rosa's neck. The housekeeping supervisor, Margaret, was focused on a scheduling crisis and barely glanced up. Rosa exhaled with relief and headed straight to the supply closet, setting Emma down on a stack of folded linens. "You have to be very quiet," Rosa instructed, tucking a blanket around her daughter. "Like a mouse. Can you be a mouse?" Emma nodded, her eyes glassy with fever, but trusting absolutely. She'd learned early not to make trouble for her mother. Rosa's heart ached with fierce love and fiercer shame. This wasn't childhood. This was survival training for a 3-year-old who should be watching cartoons and playing with toys, not hiding in hospital supply closets so her mother wouldn't lose her job. The morning dragged with excruciating slowness. Rosa cleaned 17 rooms, constantly checking the closet, constantly terrified that Emma would cry or cough loud enough to be discovered. By lunch, Emma's fever had spiked higher. By 2 o'clock, Rosa was seriously considering taking her to the ER. Consequences be damned. By 5:30, Emma was too lethargic to stay in the closet any longer. Just one more hour, Rosa pleaded, but Emma's eyes were closing, her small body shaking with chills despite the warm hoodie. Room 17 was Rosa's last stop of the day as always. She pushed her cleaning cart inside. Emma balanced on her hip, barely conscious. The room was empty except for Daniel Crawford in his permanent sleep. The monitors beeping their steady rhythm of nothing changing, nothing improving, nothing mattering. Rosa sat Emma down in the visitor's chair, but the child whimpered and reached for her mother with weak arms. "Mama, cold," she whispered. The fever was worse. Rosa touched her daughter's forehead and felt the burning heat that meant urgent care, meant bills she couldn't pay, meant missing work next week, too. She felt the walls closing in. Felt the crushing weight of being one person trying to do the impossible. Felt the exhaustion that lived in her bones. "I know, sweetie. I know," Rosa murmured, tears threatening. She needed to clean this room. She needed to finish her shift. She needed to get Emma help. She needed to be in 3 places at once. And she was so tired of failing. Emma started crying. That pitiful fevered cry that meant she was too sick to be brave anymore. Rosa held her close, swaying slightly, trying to comfort her daughter while her own panic spiraled. The machines around Daniel Crawford beeped steadily, indifferently. Nothing mattered in this room except maintaining biological functions in a body that would never wake up. Rosa made a decision born of desperation and exhaustion. Just for a minute, while she quickly cleaned, she'd lay Emma down somewhere comfortable. The visitor's chair was too cold. The floor was impossible. That left only one option. Just for a minute, Rosa whispered more to herself than to Emma. "Just while Mama finishes working," she approached Daniel Crawford's bed with her feverish, exhausted daughter in her arms. And in that moment, neither of them knew they were about to rewrite everything medicine believed was impossible. Rosa lifted Emma onto Daniel Crawford's bed with trembling hands, her mind screaming that this was wrong, reckless, career-ending. But her daughter was burning up, and Rosa was out of options. Emma curled instinctively toward warmth, her small body gravitating to Daniel's still form like he was a human heating pad. Within seconds, she'd pressed her fevered cheek against his chest, her tiny hand clutching his hospital gown, her breathing evening out as she finally found comfort. Rosa watched with her heart in her throat, ready to snatch Emma away if anyone entered, but the hallway remained quiet. It was shift change, the magical window, when everyone was focused on handoff reports and nobody patrolled the rooms. 5 minutes, Rosa promised herself, turning to her cleaning cart. Just 5 minutes and we're gone. She worked faster than she'd ever worked, her eyes constantly darting between Emma and the door. She emptied the waste bins, wiped down the equipment, mopped the floor with frantic efficiency. The monitors connected to Daniel continued their monotonous beeping, unchanged, unconcerned. Emma's breathing had deepened into actual sleep, the kind of rest she hadn't achieved in days. Rosa felt a surge of guilty relief. At least one thing was going right, even if it was completely against every rule. What Rosa didn't see were the monitors beginning to change. What she didn't notice was the subtle shift in Daniel's brain activity, the way certain readings were climbing from their flat baseline for the first time in 3 months. What she couldn't know was that Emma's weight, her warmth, her small beating heart pressed against Daniel's chest was creating a sensory input that penetrated deeper than any medical intervention had managed. Dr. Morrison was 3 doors down, finishing her evening rounds before heading home to a glass of wine and the crossword puzzle that helped her decompress from days filled with medical futility. She was thinking about Daniel Crawford, about the conversation she needed to have with his mother about transferring him to long-term care, about how to tell a woman that her son would never come back. These thoughts occupied her mind as she glanced at the central monitoring station, a habit so ingrained she did it without conscious intention. She stopped walking. Her eyes fixed on the screen labeled Crawford D, room 17. The readings were wrong. Not wrong like malfunction wrong, but wrong like something was happening. Brain activity was spiking. Heart rate variability was increasing. Muscle tone indicators were showing micro fluctuations. These were the kinds of changes they'd been desperate to see for 3 months. The tiny signs that might indicate consciousness trying to surface. "That's not possible," Dr. Morrison breathed, already moving toward room 17. Rosa was wringing out her mop when the door burst open. She spun around, her heart exploding with panic, expecting security, expecting termination, expecting everything to fall apart. Instead, Dr. Morrison rushed past her without a glance, her focus entirely on Daniel Crawford and the child sleeping on his chest. "What?" Rosa started, but Dr. Morrison held up a hand for silence, her eyes scanning the monitors with an intensity that made the room feel suddenly electric. "How long has the child been there?" Dr. Morrison demanded, her voice sharp, but not angry. "Exactly how long?" I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. She's sick and I didn't have anywhere." Rosa stumbled over her words, moving to scoop Emma away to fix this disaster, to save her job. "Don't move her," Dr. Morrison ordered, stepping closer to examine the readings. "Don't touch her. When did you put her there?" Rosa's mind was blank with terror. "Maybe 10 minutes ago. I was just cleaning and she 10 minutes. Dr. Morrison repeated, her expression shifting from disbelief to something like wonder. She pulled out her phone and called someone, her words clipped and urgent. "Get up to room 17 immediately. Bring the portable EEG. Yes, now. No, he's showing activity. Significant activity." Within minutes, the quiet room transformed into controlled chaos. 2 neurologists Rosa had never seen materialized with equipment. Dr. Morrison directed them with quiet authority. Everyone moving around Emma's sleeping form like she was made of glass. They attached additional monitors to Daniel's head, checked readings, compared scans, spoke in medical terminology that meant nothing to Rosa except that she was definitely getting fired. Should I take her away?" Rosa asked weakly, terrified and confused. "Absolutely not," Dr. Morrison said, her eyes never leaving the monitors. "Your daughter is doing something we haven't been able to do with 3 months of treatment. She's reaching him somehow." Rosa felt the world tilt sideways. Reaching him. He's in a coma. He was in a coma. One of the other doctors corrected, his voice filled with cautious excitement. His thalamus is lighting up. His cortex is processing sensory input. We're seeing the beginning of consciousness patterns we haven't seen since the accident. But that's impossible, Rosa whispered. Dr. Morrison finally looked at her and her expression was complicated. Clinical fascination mixed with human awe. Apparently not. What's your name? Rosa. Rosa Mitchell. I'm so sorry. I know I wasn't supposed to. You may have just saved this man's life, Dr. Morrison interrupted. Your daughter's weight, her heartbeat, her warmth. Something about her physical presence is stimulating his nervous system in ways medical intervention couldn't. I need you to stay here. I need her to stay exactly where she is. Can you do that? Rosa nodded, unable to process what was happening, only understanding that somehow her worst decision had become something else entirely. Emma slept on oblivious, her small hand still clutching Daniel's hospital gown. And beneath her, Daniel Crawford's brain was waking up for the first time in 3 months, pulled back to consciousness, not by medicine or money, but by the simple, innocent touch of a sick child who'd needed a place to rest. The first thing Daniel Crawford became aware of was warmth. Real warmth. Not the ambient temperature of machines, but living warmth that radiated against his chest. For 3 months, he'd been nowhere. Not dreaming, not unconscious in the peaceful sense, just absent, gone, erased from existence in a way that defied description because there was no self present to describe it. But now something was pulling him back, demanding his attention, insisting he return to a body he'd forgotten he had. The warmth was the anchor. The steady heartbeat pressed against him was the lifeline. Someone needed him to come back, and somehow that need penetrated the void where medicine had failed. His fingers twitched. Not much, barely a millimeter, but enough that the advanced sensors detected it immediately. Dr. Morrison sucked in a sharp breath. "There," she said, pointing at the monitor. "He's responding to deep stimulation." His hand just moved. Rosa stood frozen against the wall, afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid this miraculous strangeness was somehow her fault if it went wrong. Emma remained asleep, her small body rising and falling with Daniel's breath, completely unaware she was the catalyst for something medical science would struggle to explain. More doctors arrived. The room filled with specialists, all speaking in hushed, urgent tones, all studying the monitors like they were witnessing something biblical. Daniel's mother was called, his business partners were notified, and the hospital's chief of medicine materialized to observe what was being called unprecedented neural reactivation. "Keep the child exactly where she is," the chief ordered. "I want continuous monitoring. If this is really happening, we need to document everything." Hours passed. Rose's shift ended and extended without anyone mentioning it. Someone brought her coffee and a chair. Margaret, her supervisor, appeared briefly, looking confused, then departed with instructions that Rosa should remain in room 17 until further notice. Emma woke once, groggy and disoriented, and Rosa fed her crackers and juice while a circle of neurologists watched like she was performing surgery. "Mama, who's that?" Emma asked, pointing at Daniel. "A man who's been sleeping for a long time." "Baby," Rosa answered, her voice gentle. "You're helping him wake up." Emma seemed to accept this with the uncomplicated logic of childhood. "Is he tired like me?" "Yes, sweetie. Very tired." Emma patted Daniel's chest with her small hand. A gesture so innocent and kind it brought tears to Rosa's eyes. "It's okay," Emma told the unconscious man. "You can wake up now. Sleeping too long makes you more tired." At 8:30 that evening, 17 hours after Emma first climbed onto his bed, Daniel Crawford opened his eyes. The moment was anticlimactic in its simplicity. No dramatic gasp, no sudden sitting up, just his eyes flickering open with the confused, unfocused gaze of someone trying to remember where they were. Dr. Morrison was at his side immediately, shining a pen light, asking questions in a calm, professional tone that belied the excitement crackling through the room. "Daniel, can you hear me? I'm Dr. Morrison. You're in Mercy General Hospital. You've been in a coma. Can you squeeze my hand if you understand?" His hand moved, squeezing weakly but deliberately. The room erupted in controlled celebration, doctors conferring excitedly, nurses updating charts, someone calling his mother with the news that would make her weep with relief. Daniel's eyes moved slowly, taking in the ceiling, the lights, the crowd of medical professionals before finally landing on the small child lying against his chest. His expression shifted, confusion giving way to something softer. He lifted his hand with obvious effort and touched Emma's hair gently, questioningly. "Who?" His voice was barely a rasp, his throat raw from months of disuse. "Who is she?" Dr. Morrison smiled, a real smile, the first Rosa had seen on her face. "That's Emma. She's the reason you're awake. Her mother works here. And Emma's been keeping you company." Daniel's eyes found Rosa, then standing against the wall with tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed over her mouth. Their gazes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, the bewildering awareness that fate had connected them in the strangest possible way. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, the words taking enormous effort, but carrying profound weight. Rosa couldn't speak. She could only nod, overwhelmed by the impossibility of this moment, by the realization that her worst day had somehow transformed into a miracle. Emma stirred, waking up to find the man beneath her looking back at her with gentle, confused eyes. She smiled, her fever finally breaking, her resilience returning. "You're awake," she announced, delighted. "I knew you would be." Mama said you were very tired. I was, Daniel agreed, his voice gaining slight strength. Thank you for helping me. You're welcome, Emma said seriously, then added with the blunt honesty of 3-year-olds. You need a haircut. Your hair is long like a girl's. The room filled with laughter, tension breaking, the moment becoming real instead of clinical. Daniel smiled, a weak, exhausted smile, but a smile nonetheless. He'd been given a second chance at life by a poor hospital maid and her sick daughter, and nothing about his billion-dollar existence had prepared him for the humility of that debt. But even as celebration filled room 17, Rosa felt a cold threat of worry. What happened next? Emma had saved a billionaire's life, but billionaires lived in different worlds. Tomorrow, he'd return to his empire, and she'd return to her minimum wage reality. And this miraculous intersection would fade into hospital legend. She had no idea that Daniel Crawford was already making plans that would change everything. Recovery was slow, but Daniel Crawford approached it with the same fierce determination that had built his empire. Except now his motivation was different. His priorities fundamentally shifted by 3 months of darkness and the child's touch that had pulled him back. Physical therapy was brutal. His muscles had atrophied. His coordination was shattered and simple tasks like holding a spoon or walking 10 steps left him exhausted and humiliated. The therapists praised his progress, but Daniel felt like a child relearning everything while his company continued without him and the world moved forward in ways he struggled to understand. 3 months was a lifetime in technology. 3 months was an eternity in consciousness. But every evening at 6 o'clock, Rosa came to clean his room, and they talked. Not as billionaire and housekeeper, but as two people connected by circumstance and gratitude. Rosa told him about Emma's improving health, about the rent she was behind on, about the impossible mathematics of poverty in America. Daniel listened with an attention he'd never given to quarterly earnings reports, learning more about the real world from Rosa's stories than he'd learned in his entire privileged life. I want to help you, Daniel said one evening, his speech nearly back to normal now, his strength returning. I want to do something for you and Emma. You saved my life. Rosa paused in her mopping, discomfort crossing her face. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Crawford. Emma just happened to be there. It wasn't. I didn't do anything special. You talked to me, Daniel corrected gently. For 3 months, you talked to me like I was still a person. Everyone else spoke about me, but you spoke to me. That mattered. And Emma, his voice caught slightly. Emma gave me something to come back to. Not my company, not my money, just her small heartbeat reminding my body what it was supposed to do. That's everything. I don't need charity, Rosa said, her pride evident despite her circumstances. I can take care of my daughter. It's not charity, Daniel insisted. It's gratitude. It's justice. You work hard every day and barely survive. That's not right. I've made billions from software while people like you keep the world running for minimum wage. Let me fix that. At least for you. The conversation continued across multiple evenings. Daniel persistent, Rosa resistant. Both of them navigating the complicated territory between classes that rarely intersected. Finally, Rosa agreed to let him pay off her medical debts and cover Emma's ongoing healthcare, a compromise that allowed her to accept help without feeling like she'd sold her dignity. But Daniel's plans went far beyond one family. His near-death experience had cracked open something in him, revealed the emptiness of accumulation without purpose, the hollowness of success measured only in stock prices and market dominance. He'd built technology that helped hospitals track data. But he'd never considered the housekeepers who cleaned those hospitals, the cafeteria workers who fed the staff, the people whose labor kept the machinery of healthcare running while they themselves couldn't afford healthcare. 6 weeks after waking, Daniel called an emergency board meeting. His executives gathered nervously, uncertain what to expect from their resurrected leader. Some had hoped he'd remain incapacitated, had made plans to divide his empire, had grown comfortable in his absence. They weren't prepared for what came next. "I'm making significant changes," Daniel announced, his voice steady despite the fatigue that still haunted him. "First, we're establishing a foundation to support low-wage healthcare workers, housekeepers, cafeteria staff, orderlies, the people who keep hospitals functioning, medical debt forgiveness, child care assistance, education grants. I'm allocating $2 billion initially." The room erupted in objections. "That's not our business model," someone protested. "Shareholders will revolt." Another warned. "This is emotional thinking, not strategic," a third argued. Daniel held up his hand for silence, and something in his expression commanded obedience. "I died," he said simply. "Medic couldn't save me. Money couldn't save me. Technology couldn't save me. A poor woman and her sick daughter saved me. And they did it through simple human kindness. If you think that's not strategic, if you think that's not worth $2 billion, then you've forgotten what being human means." He restructured his company's relationship with the hospitals using his software, mandating fair wages for support staff as part of their contracts. He created partnerships with child care centers near medical facilities. He funded scholarships for hospital workers' children. The business media called it radical. The shareholders threatened lawsuits. His board members resigned in protest. Daniel replaced them with people who understood that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive, that capitalism could function with compassion, that the people at the bottom of the pyramid deserved more than survival wages and empty platitudes about essential workers. Rosa watched these changes unfold with a mixture of awe and discomfort. She'd become a symbol of something she'd never intended to represent. Her story used as inspiration by people who'd never cleaned a hospital room or counted pennies for groceries. Daniel featured her in promotional materials for his foundation. Always with her permission, always with compensation. She accepted it as part of the debt she couldn't repay. The cosmic bargain of having accidentally saved a billionaire's life. But the real change happened. Quietly in hospitals across Seattle and then across Washington and then across the country. Housekeepers got raises, benefits improved, child care assistance materialized, medical debt forgiveness programs launched. It wasn't revolution, just recognition, acknowledgement that dignity wasn't earned through job titles, but through the basic humanity of work itself, whatever that work happened to be. Emma started preschool at a facility Daniel's foundation sponsored. Her asthma was managed by specialists who didn't send bills Rosa couldn't pay. She grew healthy and happy, unaware that she'd been the catalyst for systemic change, that her fevered sleep on a stranger's chest had rippled outward into thousands of improved lives. And Daniel, relearning how to walk, how to live, how to matter, understood that his second chance wasn't about returning to who he'd been before. It was about becoming someone worth the miracle that had brought him back. 9 months after his awakening, Daniel Crawford stood before the annual Healthcare Innovation Summit. His appearance generating more media attention than any product launch in his company's history. The media wanted the miracle story, the coma, the dramatic awakening, the heartwarming narrative of a billionaire saved by a poor maid's daughter. Daniel gave them something more complex, more challenging, more true. He spoke about class, about dignity, about the invisible labor that kept society functioning while the workers performing it remained one emergency away from financial catastrophe. He spoke about Rosa and Emma not as props for his redemption, but as examples of a system that failed millions of Americans every day. I was supposed to be unsavable, Daniel told the audience of healthcare executives and policymakers. The best neurologists in the country treated me. The most advanced technology monitored me. My family's wealth bought me every possible intervention. None of it worked. What saved me was human touch, human presence, human kindness provided by a woman making $12 an hour who couldn't afford health care for her own child. If that doesn't tell you everything wrong with our system, you're not paying attention. The speech went viral. Critics called him a hypocrite, pointing out that he'd made his fortune in the same system he was now criticizing. Supporters praised his transformation, though some questioned whether it was performative rather than genuine. Daniel endured both responses with equanimity, understanding that credibility wasn't claimed, but earned through sustained action over time. His foundation expanded beyond health workers to include other low-wage essential employees, sanitation workers, grocery clerks, delivery drivers, the vast network of Americans whose labor sustained comfortable lives for others while they themselves struggled. The foundation's model focused on dignity rather than charity, on systemic change rather than individual handouts, on recognizing that poverty was a policy choice rather than a personal failing. Rosa became the foundation's community liaison, a position she'd initially refused until Daniel pointed out that her lived experience was more valuable than any graduate degree in understanding what low-wage workers actually needed. She worked from an office in the foundation's headquarters, earning a salary that let her move into a two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood near Emma's new school with a landlord who fixed the plumbing when it broke. The transformation felt surreal sometimes. Rosa in professional clothes, attending meetings, offering input on policy decisions, being listened to by people who'd once been invisible to her and to whom she'd been equally invisible. She struggled with imposter syndrome, with the fear that she'd be exposed as unqualified, until Daniel reminded her that the people making policy about poverty had never been poor, that their qualifications had left them fundamentally unqualified to understand the problem. "You know what it's like to count pennies for medicine," Daniel said during one of their regular strategy meetings. "You know what it's like to choose between food and heat. That's the expertise we need, not another Ivy League degree from someone who's never missed a meal." Emma thrived in ways that broke Rosa's heart with relief and regret. Relief that her daughter was healthy and happy. Regret that it had taken a miracle rather than a functioning society to achieve something so basic. Emma didn't remember being sick, didn't remember the supply closet or the desperate night she'd climbed onto a dying man's bed. She just knew that Mr. Daniel was her friend, that her mama worked in a tall building now, that life was good and had always been good because children's memories were mercifully short. Daniel's relationship with his own family and former business partners remained complicated. His mother supported his new direction while grieving the son she'd known before, the ambitious empire builder who'd been replaced by someone more serious, more purposeful, less interested in magazine covers, and more interested in actual impact. His business partners had mostly departed, unable to accept that maximizing shareholder value wasn't the only legitimate corporate goal. He rebuilt his company's leadership with people who understood that sustainable business meant sustainable communities, that exploiting workers eventually destroyed the consumer base that businesses depended on, that treating people well wasn't just moral but practical. Profits dropped initially, then stabilized, then grew in ways that surprised the skeptics. Turns out companies that paid well and treated employees with dignity attracted better workers, experienced less turnover, generated better customer service, and built stronger brand loyalty. The neuroscience community remained fascinated by Daniel's case. Dr. Morrison published papers about his recovery, carefully, noting that the mechanism remained unclear, that they couldn't definitively prove Emma's presence had caused his awakening rather than merely coinciding with it. But the timing was undeniable, the correlation was striking, and the medical implications were profound, suggesting that human connection, sensory stimulation, and perhaps even the unconscious mind's ability to sense being needed might play roles in consciousness that science didn't yet understand. "We know so little about consciousness," Dr. Morrison told a neuroscience conference. "We know even less about comas and recovery. The Crawford case suggests we've been too focused on pharmaceutical and surgical interventions while overlooking something more fundamental. The power of human presence, of touch, of connection. We can't quantify it. We can't replicate it in controlled studies. But we can't ignore it either." Daniel attended the conference, sitting in the audience, listening to doctors discuss his brain like it was a curiosity rather than the organ containing everything he was. He didn't mind if his story could advance understanding, could help other families facing similar situations that made the ordeal meaningful rather than merely traumatic. But as the conference ended and Daniel returned to Seattle to his foundation and his transformed life and his unlikely friendship with Rosa and Emma, he felt an unease he couldn't name, a sense that his story wasn't finished, that gratitude and guilt and second chances were creating momentum towards something he hadn't anticipated. The phone call that came 3 weeks later would prove that instinct correct and would force Daniel to confront what redemption really meant. The call came from a hospital in Detroit. A nurse named Patricia, with a voice tied with hope and desperation, explaining that they had a coma patient, a single mother of two, unresponsive for 6 weeks, and they'd read about Daniel's case. And was there any chance, any possibility that it could work again? Daniel sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, feeling the weight of impossible expectations. I can't. It's not something I did. It just happened. I don't have a magic cure. I know, Patricia said quietly. But her kids are here, 8 and 10 years old. They want to help their mother. And I thought, maybe just being close to her, like that little girl was close to you, maybe it could make a difference. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering Emma's weight on his chest, the warmth that had pulled him back from nowhere. He couldn't promise miracles. He couldn't guarantee that proximity and love would bridge the gap between consciousness and absence. But he could share what had worked for him, could offer hope where medicine offered none, could acknowledge that science didn't have all the answers. Let them try, he said finally. Document everything and let me know what happens. He connected Patricia with Dr. Morrison, who established protocols for the hospital to follow. Daniel funded additional monitoring equipment, specialists to observe, research to track outcomes. The woman in Detroit didn't wake up. Neither did the teenager in Phoenix, whose girlfriend slept beside him for 3 days straight. Neither did the elderly man in Boston, whose grandchildren held vigil at his bedside. But a construction worker in Portland did wake after his 7-year-old son spent nights curled against his father's still form. And a teacher in Minneapolis regained consciousness with her students' artwork covering her room and her best friend reading to her daily. And slowly, tentatively, a pattern emerged. Not a cure, not a guarantee, but a possibility that human presence, human love, human connection could sometimes reach places medicine couldn't access. Daniel's foundation expanded to support families keeping vigil, providing accommodations near hospitals, funding leave time from work, ensuring that people had the resources to try what insurance wouldn't cover because it couldn't be quantified or prescribed. Not everyone woke up. Most didn't. But some did. And that some was more than before and more than anyone had thought possible. Rosa watched Daniel navigate this new responsibility with a mixture of pride and concern. He was driven by guilt as much as gratitude, by the survivor's burden of wondering why he'd been saved when others hadn't, by the crushing weight of being someone's miracle when he'd done nothing to earn it. You can't save everyone, Rosa told him during one of their late-night conversations in the foundation offices. Emma asleep on the couch nearby, the city lights of Seattle glowing through the windows. You're trying to carry too much. I should be dead, Daniel said quietly. By every medical standard, I should still be in that bed, gone, finished. Instead, I'm here because your daughter needed a place to rest. How do I accept that? How do I justify being the one who got the miracle? You don't justify it, Rosa said gently. You honor it. You're doing that. The foundation, the workers, the changes. You're honoring what Emma gave you. But you can't save every coma patient in America through sheer force of will. That's not realistic. That's not even healthy. Daniel knew she was right. He was running himself into exhaustion, chasing redemption that always stayed ahead of him, trying to earn a gift that by its nature couldn't be earned. The therapy he'd started helped, forcing him to confront the trauma of his accident, the strange grief of months lost to absence, the guilt of surviving when survival seemed undeserved. I'm learning to live with it, he told Rosa. The not knowing why, the randomness of it, the fact that Emma probably saved my life, but we can't prove it and can't replicate it and can't turn it into something reliable. I'm learning to be grateful without needing it to make sense. Emma stirred on the couch, waking briefly to find the two adults talking seriously. Are you sad, Mr. Daniel? She asked, her voice sleepy and concerned. A little, Daniel admitted. But I'm also happy. Both things at once. Emma nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. Mama's like that sometimes, too. She cries, but she's smiling. It's weird, but it's okay. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that philosophers struggled to articulate, that humans contained multitudes, that gratitude and grief could coexist, that life was complicated and contradictory and precious precisely because of that complexity. 2 years after his awakening, Daniel Crawford stood in the completed wing of Mercy General Hospital that bore Rosa's name, the Rosa Mitchell Center for Patient Care and Family Support. It provided accommodations for families keeping vigil, child care for medical workers, community spaces where connection could happen without the sterile isolation of standard hospital design. Emma cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, delighted to be part of something important, even if she didn't fully understand what. The speeches talked about innovation and compassion and second chances. They mentioned Daniel's miraculous recovery and his foundation's impact and the thousands of workers whose lives had improved through programs he'd funded. But what mattered most to Daniel was the quiet conversation afterward with Rosa, watching Emma play in the children's area they designed together. "Thank you," Daniel said, the words still inadequate after 2 years of trying to express what he owed her. "Thank you," Rosa replied, gesturing at the facility, at the life she'd built, at the daughter who was healthy and happy and safe. They stood in comfortable silence. Two people from different worlds connected by circumstance and choice, by crisis and kindness, by the mysterious forces that sometimes pulled people back from death and sometimes didn't, but always deserved the chance to try. Daniel Crawford had been declared dead by doctors who'd given up. He'd been saved by a poor Maid sick toddler who'd simply needed a place to rest. Nothing about it made sense. Everything about it mattered. And if his second chance at life had taught him anything, it was that miracles weren't about deserving or understanding. They were about recognizing grace when it appeared and spending the rest of your life trying to be worthy of it. Not through perfection, but through presence. Not through grand gestures, but through sustained commitment to the belief that every person deserved dignity, health care, and the simple human kindness that had saved him when nothing else could. Emma waved at them from across the room, and Daniel waved back, his heart full of gratitude for the child who'd climbed onto his bed and changed everything. Some debts could never be repaid. Some gifts were too large to be earned, but they could be honored every single day in choices big and small that recognized what really mattered. Not money or medicine or miracles, but the basic, essential, irreplaceable power of human connection in a world that too often forgot to value it.